Welcome to this third session in our Diversity in Oncology initiative. I am David Craig, the CEO of Grit Health, and we are the partners to Bristol Myers Squibb in bringing this initiative to life. Our first session in this platform for change focused on hearing firsthand from the diverse patients and caregivers in clinical trials, the experience from the individuals who lived it. Our second session focused on hearing, again, firsthand from the experiences of diverse physicians and principal investigators in clinical research. Both of these sessions are available at the diversityiноncology.com platform. We hope that you'll check them out and watch them if you haven't seen them already. Okay, our time together now will be focused on how we can evolve the clinical trial process to meet patients where they are, and most importantly, to improve representation for the individuals who have been underrepresented and the experiences that have not been fully included. We'd like to begin our conversation by thinking broadly for a moment about the people who are affected and what is at stake in this conversation. We know that about 70% of cancer mortalities, the individuals who will pass from cancer, are in individuals who are over 65 years of age. That is significant because this year is the 65th anniversary of the Little Rock Nine. Let's put ourselves in that moment and look through that lens together. A few years prior to that, only 9% of American homes even had a television. In 1957, 78% of American homes now had a television. And many of their very first TV experiences as a family were huddled around the set watching the news from Little Rock. For the 70% of people who will lose their life to cancer in our current world today, they are the humans who were alive then. They were watching the TV then. They were watching in a world where people of color could not eat in the same restaurants, could not drink from the same water fountains, and could not walk into the same areas in hospitals that other people could be treated. It wasn't until 1964 that Medicaid finally forced the signs out of hospitals that didn't allow all people to be treated together and equitably. All of this is so critical for our conversation today about improving representation of diversity in clinical trials, because these 70% of the humans who will currently die from cancer grew up in that world. It is the world we have to continue changing. I am deeply honored for that reason to introduce Kevin Spencer Beckford, my fellow leader with Grit Health and a lifelong champion of diversity, equity, inclusion, transformation. Kevin will frame this moment and introduce our moderator, Dr. Edith Mitchell, for a powerful conversation with these esteemed speakers. We hope that you gain from their insights and their experiences. We hope that you share your insights and experiences in the chat and in the polls that we'll share. And at the end of this conversation together, we will have a few questions to ask you so that we can talk about the world we want to create and be a part of in the future. With that, Kevin, I'm honored to hand it to you.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate it. And just want to thank everyone for being here today. I just want to take a moment just to sort of think about what David just shared around our history as a country and how young that history is as it relates to equity. You know, there's a prescription that Martin Luther King left for us when he was murdered. He spent his whole life fighting for equity in every way, shape, and form, and was willing to put his life on the line to die for that mission. But he left us a prescription as a nation, a prescription that is yet to be filled. And when we think about, we're now in Black History Month, it's a perfect time for this section of the series, and how it's important for us when we think about inequity in all of its forms, whether it be in the judicial system, in housing, in finance, in healthcare. There are many facets of this problem. but our cup of that problem, or cup of change, or opportunity, or agency, position, and power to drive change is healthcare. That's why we're here, whether you're a patient, a caregiver, provider, or supporter of someone who is battling with a health condition or cancer. Either way, one way, shape, or form, we are touching that inequity, whether it be from the early stages of prevention, early detection, treatment, and of course, outcomes. So it's a tall order, but it's something that I feel confident that we can accomplish. Mainly because any problem, no matter how big it is, can be broken down into smaller parts. And so what I would encourage you to do today as you listen through the panelists and the questions that we're going to cover, the ideas and thoughts that will come out of that, I want you to start thinking about what your cup is. And literally, physically think in your mind that if this problem was an ocean and everybody had a cup to dip into that ocean of the problem, you could work on that. And if you're done, you go back and get some more because the problem is that big. But you won't feel overwhelmed because you realize that that cup is related to your position, your power, and your agency, and how you can affect change. If you're a CEO of the company, or if you're a researcher or a scientist, or you're running a clinical trial, all of those things, your cup is formed by that. And so the question is, how do we make sure we understand first how we arrive at inequity, and then to be able to use that lens to be able to start to deconstruct and dismantle the inequitable systems that we are live with every day. So Black History Month is certainly a good time for us to think about that and to put a sense of focus on it. But I just want to encourage you to think about how throughout the day today, through the program, start thinking about your cup and what should be in it and what you can do. And we'll touch base on that at the end of the program today as really issuing a call to action. So I'm going to segue now. We have a couple of poll questions that we're going to give you a chance to take a look at, and want to qualify those questions a little bit. So the question that there's going to be two poll questions. We're going to ask for the folks to answer that are primarily patients, survivors, and caregivers should answer these questions, mainly because the nature of the question is going to be looking for your experience as a patient, survivor, or caregiver. So you should hopefully see popping up on your screen the first question. I consider clinical trials to be part of routine care. Believe clinical trials should be part of routine care. So if you could, we'll give you a few seconds just to read through that and to take that poll question, and we'll have a second one after that. Okay, so we'll segue now to the next question. So 60%. Oh, can we put that back up for just a little bit? I apologize, sorry. Look at that. So strongly agree. Consider clinical trials to be part of the routine care. Interesting. Very cool. All right, next question. I'm hesitant to participate in clinical trials because. So I'll give you a few seconds here to think about those answers. And again, only for patients, survivors, and caregivers. Okay, we'll take a look at the results. Interesting. I'm not hesitant to participate in clinical trials. That's excellent, over 50%. Cool. certainly when we look at some of the answers there, the first few answers, part of one of our challenges, I think, in this area, of course, is education and awareness, to be able to remove some of the myths and the fears that don't go along with participating in clinical trials. And how do we get to the communities that are underserved that have not traditionally been part of that process? So with that, I'm looking forward to, I'm so excited, to be honest with you, to have the opportunity to introduce you to Dr. Edith Mitchell, who is going to be moderating our panel today. And I'm going to, first of all, tell you that a very special moment happened recently in Washington, and Dr. Edith Mitchell was there to be a part of that, and would like to be able to, as I introduce her, to let you know that I'd like to have you maybe just share with us, Dr. Mitchell, a little bit about what was it like for you to be there in Washington and to experience such a huge moment for us, where there's almost thinking of the moonshot, as we've heard before, as a country, just to get to the moon, to have that same level of resources being channeled at being able to address cancer in ways we've done before, but certainly in a way it feels like getting the whole country focused on getting this done. And so it just feels like a very special moment for us. And Dr. Mitchell, I'd love to have you start out, maybe just share with us a little bit of what that was like, and to just thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Spencer, for your introduction to this program today. And thank you for inviting us to be a part of it. Certainly, diversity in medicine, diversity in healthcare, and clinical trials, very important, is a part of what we do. When we think about the National Cancer Act of 1971, it was authorized and approved by the Congress and later signed on December 23rd, 1971. And here we are now in 2022, just a few weeks from December 23rd, of course, 2021, which marked 50 years of the National Cancer Act. And what we have seen is that there has been tremendous changes in the United States that has affected our population, as well as populations in other countries and around the world. And what we can say, that as a result of 50 years of the National Cancer Act, we have seen a tremendous decline in cancer death rates or cancer mortality rates in this country. And it has been because of many individuals, companies, patients, researchers, congressional representatives, and others participating in cancer research. We have seen an increase in the responsibilities and activities of the National Cancer Institute as a result of these changes. We have also seen our cancer centers, of which there are now 71 designated cancer centers in the United States and represented by the National Cancer Institute, the cooperative group programs, the SEER programs, the President's Cancer Panel, National Cancer Advisory Board, and others that have participated in this effort over the 50 years. And I am so proud to have been a part of it. So have our other participants in this panel today. I'm Edith Mitchell, and I am clinical professor of medicine and medical oncology at the Sidney Kimmel Cancer Center and Sidney Kimmel Medical College of Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia, where I am one of the associate directors of the Cancer Center. I am the founding director of the Center to Eliminate Cancer Disparities. And with the national cancer programs, I have been a member of the CTAC program at NCI for about 5 years, and I'm currently on the Council of Councils for the National Institutes of Health, or NIH. And thank you for indicating that, yes, I was in Washington last week for the presentation by President Biden, his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, and the Vice President, Dr. Kamala Harris of the United States of America. So it was a great program. And with that, President Biden, who as Vice President under the administration of former President Obama, where former President Obama initiated the cancer moonshot and said he was putting Joe in charge. And this day, last Wednesday, President Biden gave his new reimagination of the cancer moonshot and dedication to cancer research. And he indicated that he wanted equity with all individuals involved to be a part of it, to be recipients of the components of the new cancer moonshot, and to enact his recommended effort that he wanted to see a 50% drop in cancer mortality rates. That's further in 25 years. So thus, many individuals who were parts of the program before, many from Congress and others, and he indicated that he wanted everybody involved, that is, in cancer research, clinical cancer, patients, families, as well as caretakers, and everybody having not only the benefits of the new program, but opportunities to participate so that everybody in the United States is not only receiving benefits as needed, but also preventing cancer and being a part of early detection programs so that we could have this decrease in cancer, and certainly the cancer that is found early, when it has more opportunities for us to treat effectively and to give good outcomes, as well as screening, which allows prevention in certain cases. So we're on a new cancer moonshot, and thus all of us can be involved. So I am so thankful for this program today. And by the way, after the president's presentation to the country, we released the report of the President's Cancer Panel, which I am fortunate to be a member of that panel. We released the President's Cancer Panel report on screening, the gaps in screening. So with that, I'd like to now present to you our panel for this discussion today. And we have a great panel where there are many individuals here who I have worked with over the years and who will introduce themselves. We have Dr. Carolyn Fang, Dr. Matthew Kolkey, and Dr. Ruben Mesa. So if you could introduce yourselves in the order that I called your names, I will appreciate that, and then we will begin discussions. So Dr. Fang, if you would like to go first.
Hi, thank you so much, Edith, and thank you to the webinar organizers. I'm really thrilled to be invited to participate on this panel. As Edith said, my name's Carolyn Fang. I am a professor in the Cancer Prevention and Control Program and the Associate Director for Population Science at Fox Chase Cancer Center in Philadelphia. And most of my career has been spent on trying to enhance participation in and increase access to cancer screening among underserved populations in our region.
Dr. Kolkey, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. And again, it's an honor to be here. So I'm Matt Kolkey. I am the Chief of Hematology Oncology and co-director of the Cancer Center at Boston University and Boston Medical Center. A medical center that serves a population of whom more than 50% are from underrepresented groups. My past is actually more really focused on clinical trials and research in gastrointestinal oncology, and in particular neuroendocrine tumors, where I participated and developed a number of clinical trials. One of the most amazing experiences there was seeing some of these really new drugs actually work in situations where patients really didn't have many other options. It was a really impressive experience, and I was just struck by the fact that in my current role, I see many patients that do not have access to those same opportunities. And bringing those opportunities to our patients has really been a focus of mine over the past few years and moving forward.
So thank you so much, Dr. Kolkey. And last but not least, Dr. Mesa.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here today with this wonderful panel for really a meaningful discussion. Myself, I'm a hematologist that focuses on chronic leukemias and have been an investigator or co-investigator on over 100 different therapeutic trials. So it's something near and dear to my heart in terms of my career. In my current role, I'm also the executive director of the Mays Cancer Center in San Antonio, Texas, where we have a critical population that faces many issues and challenges with health equity, health disparities, and is a Latino majority community. Our center really has long given significant focus on how do we have clinical trials really be a resource for all of those in our region, across our catchment area and beyond. I think it's a great discussion. I think, as Kevin said in his introductory comments, the ability to participate in a clinical trial, I strongly think, is an extension of the standard of care in the United States in particular. This is how we make a difference. I think very much, as was just stated, the ability to be able to access these agents, these trials, when the options that we have before us are no longer working, is not a luxury. It is a necessity. And whether we're thinking about trials in prevention, screening, therapy, or survivorship, it's both good science that they be equitable and inclusive, but certainly is an important piece for all in our society to be able to participate. So look forward to the discussion.
So thank you so much. It's so important that we include in our discussions about healthcare, about diseases, and cancers, of course, being one of those areas, And we used to call cancer as one disease process. Now we know there are multiple cancers, multiple disease processes, and even for two patients with what we call the same cancer, we know from research, from participating in clinical trials, that every patient's cancer is a disease in itself. And with the research that we have done and continue to do, we know that there are changes in the genomics of the tumor that allow us to evaluate, first of all, some prevention processes. Secondly, some understanding of the cancer and its risk factors, but that also allows us to design diagnostic tests, therapeutic interventions, and not only choose therapeutic interventions, but we have the ability through research and through patients participating in the clinical trials, the risk of response to that therapeutic intervention. And we can also predict follow up after treatment and the processes that we need to develop and institute and implement for successful survivorship. So across the cancer continuum, from prevention through diagnosis and treatment, and then follow up, we have learned a lot, and that has been through implementation and conduction of clinical trials. And we are so appreciative to the researchers for their efforts, but also appreciative of the fact that patients and their families agreed to these clinical trials, participated in them, and therefore we have more information that will be beneficial not only to the participating patients in the clinical trials, but for those individuals to come later. It is also recognized that many populations in the United States are left out of clinical trials, with patients indicating that the most frequent reason they didn't participate is that they were not invited. So education of the healthcare workers has been a part of what we do. And why do we say this is even important now? When we think about the fact that, for example, the African-American population is about 13% of the United States population. Yet for our high priority NIH clinical trials, only approximately 6.7% are African-American patients. And for those actually presenting to the FDA and approved, only 1.6% of these clinical trials are African-Americans. Similar findings in the Hispanic population, which consists of approximately 18% of the US population, yet only 3.1% of NIH clinical trials participants nationwide are Hispanics. And for those in the novel drug trials presented to the FDA, only 2.7%. And being the two highest populations of minorities in the United States, those are abysmal numbers. When we also look at Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, and the native population of the United States. All of those together constitute more than 6% of the US population, yet in NIH clinical trials, only 1%. For FDA novel drug trials, only 1%. So therefore, if we are to attain equity in clinical trials in the United States, but not only for clinical trials, that is giving the advantages of our clinical trials to individuals throughout the country. So I'd like to start, perhaps Dr. Mesa, if you could tell us something about San Antonio, where you are director of the Cancer Center there. Tell us some things about the Hispanic population, or sometimes referred to as Latinx. Can you tell us a bit about San Antonio, the population, and some of the great things you have done there in the city and in the entire area to increase the participation in clinical trials there?
Well,
You've got the
thank you.
floor.
Thank you, Edith. So San Antonio and our catchment area is San Antonio in South Texas. So it's a 38 county area. It goes all the way down to the Rio Grande Valley. And there's a range of different challenges as it relates to populations within San Antonio, rural areas, and then the populations around the Rio Grande Valley, where there are deep areas of persistent poverty, sometimes lack of infrastructure and other pieces. Our overall catchment area is 69% Latino and over 90% by the Rio Grande Valley. And we find that there are a range of challenges as it relates to access to healthcare, late presentation of the diagnosis of cancer that can limit options, higher rates of baseline comorbidities that sometimes exclude clinical trials as an option, from elevation in renal function or diabetes or elevated liver function tests. There sometimes can be cultural or language related issues, issues of transportation, issues of trust. So our center, and much credit is due to many at the center, Dr. Emily Ramirez, who is our AD of COE, who has been a leader in this for many era, as well as my predecessors in the role as director and the support of the center, long have made the ability for individuals to participate in clinical trials a critical focus, and have a minority recruitment committee and plan for each and every study which opens, and recognizing that studies that are in prevention and screening that might be in the purview of Dr. Fang might look very different than an active therapeutic clinical trial for a GI cancer or a leukemia or other pieces. We really try to dissect study by study both those issues kind of within the study as it relates to kind of pre-existing barriers, difficulty in terms of the schedule, unrealistic expectations in terms of perfect organ function for the liver or kidneys, sometimes that are included as boilerplate versus really being critical. The high quality translation of the informed consent form into Spanish. Being Cuban myself, you could translate something word by word and then end up with a document on the other end that is nonsensical. So actually translate it in a way that people can understand what you're really trying to get across. We have learned many important lessons as it relates to culture. In our area that is very family-based, there traditionally is a family healthcare expert that is critical that they be included in decisions around treatment, as well as most certainly any clinical trial. And that expert might be a pharmacist tech, It might be a respiratory tech, it could be a physician. But that any critical discussion regarding complex options, whether it be surgery or a clinical trial, needs to have critical representation from across the family, usually for that individual, and in particular, that health expert. Because if they're not in the room, the patient is one, not likely to participate, but two, probably really isn't fully engaged in kind of understanding and making that decision. So that has really been a critical piece that we have come to understand. We have worked to really establish both navigation and patient supportive services that really try to overcome those most reproducible barriers in terms of travel, in terms of access, timing, and pieces of that nature. We have worked hard to try to develop partners in the areas in the Rio Grande Valley and others, recognizing significant distances for transportation, making those things incredibly difficult. Now, in parallel with this, our team has worked very hard, sometimes with partners. We are in the Alliance for Inclusive Research along an effort being supported by Genentech that includes City of Hope, it includes UAB, includes the West Clinic, trying to develop ranges of different educational modules and webinars, both building greater awareness and experience amongst providers, both our providers, trying to roll that out to other providers kind of in the region. There can be a lot of preconceived biases against individuals enrolling in clinical trials. Sometimes the assumption that a patient who is a minority is not going to be interested in a trial, which very much may not be the case, but it clearly needs to be discussed and barriers overcome and broader educational pieces. We have developed educational pieces that are really non-specific trial specific, trying to demystify the clinical trial process in a range of ways. Patricia Shalala, one of our investigators, just had rolled out a effort like this in Spanish with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Again, trying to demystify clinical trial participation in Spanish. I view that some of the opportunity really for the future is to really try to delve deeper in the area of prevention and screening, in addition to the efforts that have been done with therapeutic studies. I think a major difficulty I see that is really heartbreaking is the degree and number of late-stage presentations which occur. The number of patients we have who are presented with their cancer because they roll into the emergency department with GI bleeding or an ulcerative breast mass, where a breast mass has been noted by them for months, but they had a lack of access. They couldn't get off of work. They were afraid if they came in, they'd get reported to immigration. These things are just tragic. So how do we really intervene in these earlier, let alone try to further move screening trials to be able to make them more feasible? The process for many of these individuals of taking time off to do a colonoscopy prep and go in for a colonoscopy, or take time off to have mammography, is very difficult. So as we evolve to novel ways of screening with circulating tumor DNA, with other less invasive approaches that are more feasible, I think have the potential to really have a great impact. So it's an area of passion for us, but certainly look forward to some of the important lessons learned from my colleagues on the panel.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Mesa, for that insight into those barriers that exist in rural areas, as well as in areas where individuals might not speak English, might not even be able to understand the clinical trials and screening processes. Thank you so much. Now, Dr. Fang, you have been in charge of a program in Philadelphia to provide education and awareness, the Community Ambassador Program. Tell us a bit about that program and some of the advantages and how you have cracked some of these barriers. Go ahead, please.
All right, thank you, Dr. Mitchell. I do want to echo what Dr. Mesa was saying. I think education, getting out into the community and offering a lot of information is really a great place to start, because the goal is, you know, patients and even community members, the first time they hear about a clinical trial should not be when they're in the clinic and needing a clinical trial. They should have some awareness of, you know, what the science research infrastructure is, so that when they are offered a clinical trial, let's say, they're not frightened, surprised, unsure. You know, as Dr. Mesa alluded to, informed consent is a very integral part of clinical trials. And oftentimes these trials have like 20 to 30 page long consents, and that can be very frightening. And so we want to demystify this experience before people are in the seat where they need to make these decisions very quickly. So the Community Ambassador Program, which is being run by the Office of Community Outreach at Fox Chase Cancer Center, really is trying to take that first step by training members of the community. In our program, the community members who are being trained happen to be 100% from a racial or ethnic minority population. Actually, they are 100% Black or African American, and 50% of them are actual cancer patients or survivors themselves. So they undergo a 7-week training program in which they learn about, you know, clinical trial information, what the process is, what all the steps are, what are the key elements and components involved in clinical trials. And then they go out with this information and reach others in their own communities to explain clinical trials, to describe clinical trials. They share information. Over a 10-month period, we trained 19 ambassadors, and over a 10-month period, those 19 ambassadors reached out to nearly 3,000 people by holding small group discussions or one-on-one discussions through their own networks. They disseminated literature and information to their various community groups that they belong to, and information throughout their community. And that has been very successful in increasing awareness of clinical trials, in reducing mistrust of trials when they're learning about it from someone in their own community. It's less threatening and frightening. And we have seen, you know, an increase in the proportion of minorities who are enrolling on clinical trials in our own institution. In addition to the Community Ambassador Program, our institution also has a number of community events that they hold every year. Many of them are called Together Fighting Cancer. It's usually around a specific cancer site, Together Fighting Lung Cancer or Together Fighting Gynecologic Cancer. And it involves having clinicians and researchers come together with a community to describe some of the advances that they're seeing in their field, and also some of the research that's coming down the pike. Again, it's all directed towards demystifying the process so that people understand what it is that is involved in a clinical trial, what it is that is involved in research. And we also conduct a lot of clinical forums or community forums where a clinical trial participant is a speaker, is a panelist, and can describe their own experience, what they went through, what that participation in a clinical trial looked like for them. You know, again, trying to like peel back the curtain so everyone can understand, you know, what's involved, and they can learn, also take that opportunity to learn about some of the community concerns that people might have about research. And one last point I do want to make, I know you probably can't see my button, but so aside from the community facing angle, when people come into the clinic, so when they have an appointment, the clinicians who are seeing patients wear buttons that say, ask me about clinical trials. Now, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physician, so mine says, ask your doctor about a clinical trial. But the point is, again, make it, normalize the conversation. Everybody should be aware that this is an option. If you bring it up, that's okay. You don't have to wait for your doctor to bring it up. That these are conversations and discussions that people should be having, should be encouraged to have. And it's just a normal part, standard of care, that these are things that are meant to benefit the entire community.
Thank you so much. That is tremendous information and insight into this program for education. And Dr. Kolkey, you have been involved in education about clinical trials for many years. Tell us about some of the things that are ongoing in Boston to reach populations and underrepresented groups in clinical trials. You've got the floor.
Sure, thank you very much. So I am very fortunate in a sense to be working at a hospital, Boston Medical Center, that actually has a wealth of experience in dealing with underrepresented groups. There are huge resources, translators, patient navigators were mentioned, social work, food support, and actually very strong connections with community health centers. So there's already a very strong foundation there, really based on the fact that historically, this really has been a hospital that has focused on underserved populations and on an incredibly diverse population. One of the things, though, that had not historically been a part of the care provided was clinical trials. It was really viewed almost as sort of a separate thing, something that was not necessarily that important even to medical care. And I would say our biggest intervention over the past few years has been trying to change that mindset, to really make clear that clinical trials, especially in the cancer realm, are not only part of regular clinical care, but are in many cases the best clinical care for the patient. So we've worked very hard to make clinical trials part of the care that everyone receives, bringing in the research teams directly to the clinic, making sure that the providers are involved side by side with the clinical research teams in those discussions with the patients, because the patients very often do have a trust in their providers. One thing I would also mention that perhaps isn't mentioned enough, but was also brought up here, educating the providers that clinical trials really are part and parcel of what we need to be doing. They're not certain patients that are trial candidates and certain patients that are not. Every patient should really be a trial candidate. And so it's educating patients, but also I think educating providers is a critical piece to make sure that everyone has that mindset.
Thank you so much. Now, over the last 2 years, certainly COVID-19 has made a great change in how we practice medicine. And many patients with COVID-19 also having cancer. And we recognize from the news media and others that more underrepresented minority patients have disproportionately suffered from both COVID as well as cancer. So who would like to go first in describing how we've worked with clinical trials to understand patients with cancer, patients with COVID, And some of those things that we needed to do to encourage clinical trial participation for individuals suffering from both cancer, COVID-19, and the disparities in mortality rates from both of those disease processes. Doctor, I think I'll call. Dr. Mesa, do you want to go first? And we'll have each of you describe some of the things we've had to do in medicine to take care of both of those populations.
Sure. So I think there have been, many challenges that they have faced somewhat disproportionately. So one, I think in many circumstances, many of the realities of COVID have been disproportionately difficult. Two-income families, hourly workers, kids having to attend school remotely has been a huge burden that interferes with access to care, frequency of screening, other sort of pieces that I think, again, we've seen that negative impact people on a range of ways in terms of ignoring health-related concerns, later presentations with COVID leading to worse outcomes in a range of ways, greater rates of baseline comorbidities, that in particular in the pre-vaccination phase of the pandemic, related to higher rates of mortality without question. I think a delay in being able to obtain the vaccine for a range of things, getting off of work, transportation, and other pieces. I think these things have improved to some degree with the degree of vaccination and other pieces, but many things that impacted in a negative way. As it related to cancer, I think in particular as it related to the undiagnosed cancer, because both, I think, as we had alluded to, a delay in routine screening without question that I think we'll see both in minority as well as non-minority patients. But I think really the challenge with trying to obtain medical care for symptoms that are signs of cancer that normally would have found cancer earlier were clearly delayed. The decrease in elective procedures, challenges at work making it even harder to leave work than normal. The extra burden of childcare has been very disproportionate in many ways. Now, another piece of this has been the innovations that have come around for clinical trials as it relates to the advent of telemedicine. So one, there's some preconceived biases that I think we've had to try to navigate through with a lot of assumption that minority patients or those with challenges in terms of economic resources or social determinants of health would not be able to participate in telemedicine because of lack of access to devices or other pieces. We've tried to overcome that with bilingual individuals being able to provide tech support, sometimes by really trying to engage for older patients their children, or again, that family health care expert kind of in that process, that it usually was able to be overcome, but it did take an intentional effort. I think many of us would relate that we've seen that the issues have sometimes been as much related to issues of age and comfort level with tech devices than others. I do think the ability to do some of this by phone has expanded greatly. We clearly see, uniform access to high quality Wi-Fi or internet signal is a factor in this equation. Access to cameras and laptops and such clearly a barrier. The phone thing has clearly helped. So I think it's taken creativity. I think it's also taken the willingness to recognize that don't have a preconceived bias that these individuals will not be able to do this by telemedicine, but it may take some creativity and other approaches as well. So I think there's been both good and bad. I do think that we're in a better situation now, but that largely has been due to the severity of illness, I think, has decreased because of the efforts related to vaccination and others, as much as other efforts.
Mhm, mhm. And you've mentioned telemedicine, but in some areas of the country, there are not even towers where access can be generated. So there's no technology even for individuals with smartphones. So Dr. Kolkey, I know that Boston Medical Center has enacted a number of clinical trials by establishing centers in the community so that the communities have access to individuals, the doctors, the research associates and others. So tell us about taking the clinical trials and as well as treatment program to the community in some of these centers.
So the COVID epidemic relates exactly to this question, and it's actually, I think, quite instructive and has been really quite interesting. At the beginning of the COVID pandemic, there were clearly it was clearly disproportionately affecting underserved communities, and interestingly enough, access to some of the early COVID therapeutics was only available through clinical trials. And the clinical trials were not available or not easily available to many of the patients who were most affected by COVID, simply by virtue of the fact of where those clinical trials were being done and opened quickly. So COVID in many ways has been a huge wake-up call. And over time, those clinical trials have become more available universally. They become more accessible. And the programs that you just mentioned, going out to the communities, establishing those relationships, making clinical trials available more broadly, was absolutely critical in helping address some of the issues we found with COVID. So we are in a much better position now. I would certainly hope that nothing like COVID ever happens again, but it did illustrate that we can enroll patients from all walks of life to clinical trials successfully. That clinical trials, as we saw, can be absolutely critical in providing the best clinical care. And I think we're starting to see, and I hope we're starting to see, that some of those lessons we learned from COVID will now translate into the cancer sphere. Cancer is also a fatal disease and desperately needs clinical trials.
That's great information. Now, Dr. Fang, I think you have done a lot of work with cancer networks. And in the Philadelphia area, we're all aware of the Fox Chase networks. So can you tell us how the Fox Chase networks have contributed to providing clinical trials in the community? Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. So there are a number of, as Dr. Mitchell mentioned, networks within our system. Fox Chase Cancer Center is actually a part of the Temple University Health System now. And so there's a large network of both community and academic clinics where our clinical trials can be administered. And as Dr. Mason, Dr. Kolkey were saying, they can reach further into the community and does help reduce some of the barriers in terms of having to get transportation to a specialized center. So that has been very helpful in increasing enrollment in the community. I have to admit that COVID, as everybody else has acknowledged, really had a significant impact there for a period of time when we were not allowing at our cancer center and many of the other centers any visitors. So if you were a cancer patient, you could come in But as many of you on this webinar know, cancer patients don't come in by themselves. They come in with family members and friends and other supportive care people. And it was very challenging for a significant period of time when we had to turn those family caregivers away. And it was heartbreaking to say, I'm sorry, you cannot come in with your partner, your significant other, your mother, your father. But we had to do that to maintain the safety of the patients who were at the cancer center and at the clinics. So I think for clinical trials, it really did have an impact because many times our populations like to discuss the opportunity of being on a clinical trial with their family member. It's not a decision that they make by themselves. It's often a decision that they make in consultation with their family members. And so excluding those people from the rooms was, I think, a detriment to everybody, but it had to be done during COVID. We, certainly released that restriction now, but for a period of time, I think that had a significant impact. In terms of our screening studies, when we were in the community, I would have to say that prior to COVID, we had large events where we could gather like 100, 200 people together in a room, do our educational interventions and do navigation. But obviously that had to stop during COVID. Gathering any number of people in a room in a public setting was frowned upon. So I do feel that there will be significant consequences. We are still out there doing our community screening events, but it's on a much smaller scale. So it's much more laborious to reach a large number of people. We're doing one-on-one versus 100 people at a time. And I think that will have a negative impact in the long run.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're getting close to finishing this part of our program. And I would like to say that, yes, providing access to clinical trials has been a big part of implementation strategies in the United States. And we are currently using a mammogram unit. We call it the bus that goes to the communities. So again, it is taking cancer screening to the community so that we can have greater participation in the screening clinical trials. And then if screening allows for a diagnosis of cancer, then we work with the patient and the patient's family to get them to one of our community sites for clinical trials, or helping the patient receive therapy at our main center city location if needed. So things we have done have been, one, to extend the hours of operation of our infusion center till 9 p.m. at night for scheduled patients. And then later, if more time is needed for that particular cancer treatment. So that has allowed for greater participation in the clinical trials for individuals who have to work or who have children to take care of, and thus allowing for greater participation in our clinical trials. We have also extended clinical trials treatments to Saturdays and Sundays, and we have a full time, I shouldn't say a full time. We have a faculty member on site until the last patient is treated on a Saturday or Sunday. And if a patient needs to be seen on Saturday or Sunday, there is a faculty member in our treatment center that allows for greater participation in clinical trials and access to care. I'd like to mention also there is a Black sorority. In fact, it's Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. It was the first African-American college sorority. And now it was formed in 1908. And members have developed a mammogram unit that actually goes all over the country. And as a part of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sororities program, we connect individuals with the community so that if a patient comes in for a mammogram, we not only do the mammogram, but we have funds if their insurance doesn't cover. And we also give them information on physicians and clinicians and health centers within a given location. So this mammogram bus, it's pink and green, those are the sorority colors, that has been everywhere from the San Francisco area on the West Coast to Nevada and other areas. And then as far south as Atlanta, South Carolina, North Carolina, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So this is an opportunity for other individuals who are not physicians or who may not be physicians, but they are advocates and connect with centers. So it's bringing into the healthcare arena other individuals who do have community contacts and leave information with the patients, and that includes follow-up care and physicians. And this has been tremendously effective. I work with the group, and I can't tell you how many times we are told that the pink and green mammogram bus has helped individuals in communities. So that's one way of bringing more clinical trials to the communities. We have our cancer center networks, and then we have the National Cancer Institute programs, such as the NCORE and others. There are 1,100 different sites for clinical trials around the United States. So it's providing our people with opportunities for participation in clinical trials. It is providing our clinicians the educational process so that they not only know about the latest clinical trials, but have participatory information regarding these individuals. So that's a great opportunity through the NCI. So we are getting toward the end of our program. I'd like to, at this time, offer all of our panelists the opportunity to say something that they perhaps didn't indicate previously or have new ideas. And we started at number one before. I think we'll start at the bottom with Dr. Kolkey. You'll be first. Dr. Mesa will be second. And Dr. Fang will finish with your comments this time. So Dr. Kolkey, you've got a few minutes. Go ahead and give us any information, last thoughts, or things that you didn't mention before. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I think my final thought is really just to note that we've seen just incredible progress in cancer treatments over the past several years. One of the most exciting things to witness scientifically, to witness some of the amazing responses and impact on patients. All of those great treatments were available in many cases years before on clinical trials. And as we've just been talking about here, those clinical trials were not always easily available to everyone who lives in this country. It's exciting to see the focus on this. And I think I would just urge everyone, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can take some just small steps as we having our staff right there in the clinic together with providers, making that extra effort. In our experience, just some of those small steps have resulted in doubling of clinical trials enrollment in just a couple of years. So you just got to start. And I think we have a long ways to go, but it's definitely, I think, an exciting and really important path we're on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Dr. Meza, you are next. The floor is yours.
So I think folks come at this issue from two angles, and I think they're both correct. The first is really around what is just, and I think as Kevin had alluded to in his initial comments, I think it is just that every member of our society is able to receive good health care, and clinical trials are an essential part of that. The other way people come at it is that it is good science. And I think this is a critical piece. We have learned, Edith, you alluded to, that again, we've evolved during our careers from where there was a breast cancer trial, a lung cancer trial, acute leukemia trial, to highly specific trials based on disease phenotype, molecular markers, stage of disease, and others. And so many issues as it relates to race and ethnicity are additional parts that really provide much greater granularity in terms of the differences between the disease, the likelihood of response to a therapy, unexpected toxicities. It is critical science that our trials represent the population of individuals that may be receiving the therapy. We've evolved from the old days that we gave a drug to everyone with lung cancer, and there was a 10% response rate, to an era where we recognize that based on a molecular marker, there's a group that was highly likely to respond, and there was a majority that were not likely to respond at all. So it's a critical evolution of precision medicine about safety and efficacy. And the lessons that we learn from subgroups participating with the entirety of our population participating in studies sometimes have lessons for that specific group, but frequently will have lessons for everyone else as well. So it is both just and it is good science. And that's why it's such a critical thing for us to continue to focus on. It's not easy. It sometimes takes a lot of creativity. It takes some elbow grease. It sometimes takes increase in resources. And it certainly takes a team effort. It's about the pipeline of new people in training, and some are coming at it from that angle. It's around community awareness long before individuals are presented with a clinical trial. It's around creating trust so that many of the issues in the past, which are genuine, some of which were very negative, need to be addressed and overcome for people to have comfort in participating. So it's not easy, but it is important, and the benefits really can help all of society, because the lessons we learn from subgroups of people will lead us to further discoveries that impact others.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meza, for those great comments. And our next panelist, Dr. Fang, if you can give some of your last minute thoughts about our topic today and how we can influence participation in clinical trials from diverse populations.
Yeah, wow, that's a big, objective there. But I guess my lesson learned and what I want everybody to take away from this panel, from my perspective, is this is truly a partnership. It's a collaboration. It's not scientists or doctors saying, this is what you need to do. This is really, everybody has ownership. And I want the people on this webinar, I want the people in the community to feel empowered to be a part of this dialogue, that they are a part of the clinical trial conversation. They can have a voice in how clinical trials are shaped and developed. We are eager to hear everybody's opinions. We want everybody to have input. We don't want to be the one saying this is how it should be done, but we want to hear how people want these things to be done and how can we best overcome some of these challenges. And we should work together, and it should be a partnership with equal voices and equal input and equal ownership. And I think that that's really where we're going to go. I feel it's like the tide's turning. People want to be empowered to be a part of the conversation. And I think that if they feel that way, they will be extremely motivated to engage in clinical trials. So I really say, you know, there's a lot of work to be done, but we all have a small part to play in shaping the conversation.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. I'd like to mention just another area that may not be well known regarding clinical trials, and that is the All of Us clinical trial that is supported by the National Institutes of Health. And with this study and this clinical trial, individuals don't have to have cancer or Alzheimer's or any other disease process. And what this involves is giving the participant back information regarding their risk for disease processes and conditions. You can find it on the NIH website. Ask for All of Us, search for All of Us, and it can give you information on all of us. And that information is given back to the individual. And I don't call them patients because what we're looking for with All of Us is for people who have no symptoms or no known disease processes, but we may be able to find out their risk factors and give them back that information so they can use it with their physicians or however they determine use. So All of Us is very important, and just go on the NIH website. Also, for information on clinical trials for various cancers and other disease processes, go onto the NIH website and look for clinicaltrials.gov. And you can find clinical trials regarding many places. And I urge individuals to beware of false information that you may find on the internet. Just beware. And for clinicaltrials.gov, it is a trusted site where you can find information. So at this time, I think we have just a few minutes for questions in the chat. Dave, can you tell me if there are questions in the chat? Or if individuals want to place something in the chat, you may do so. So I have one question here from the chat asking, how can we get more information on available clinical trials. And as I mentioned, clinicaltrials.gov is a good place to search for specific clinical trials. You can also ask your healthcare provider, since many of these trials are available in the communities. So always ask your doctor or your healthcare team about clinical trials. I think that's very important.
Edith, if I could
Yes.
just jump in there as well. I know as it relates to heme malignancies that the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society has a philanthropy-supported clinical trials center where they have a bit of a navigation process to help folks try to match them up with trials in their areas and things of that nature. If there's a corresponding resource like that in solid tumors, I'm not aware, but I suspect things like that may well evolve with your prior colleague, Karen Knudsen. It wouldn't surprise me if she came up with something like that as well in solid tumors. But at least with heme malignancies, that really can be a lovely resource through the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society.
That's a great idea, Dr. Mesa. And yes, there are a number of sites. For example, the International Myeloma Foundation has clinical trials available and information for those with multiple myeloma. And for solid tumors, there are just enormous ones. The PanCan for pancreatic cancer has clinical trials available. The Colon Cancer Alliance for colon cancer, there's another cholangiocarcinoma for that disease site. There's the Prostate Health Education Network. So for solid tumors, they tend to be individualized, and I didn't omit any intentionally today, but there are many others, many other organizations for the solid tumors, lots of them. And they're mostly related to specific tumors. So it doesn't come out as solid tumors. It's each individual tumor. And yes, I work with a number of those organizations, including the IMF and MMRF for myeloma patients, because interestingly, multiple myeloma is the most disparate of all cancers, with African Americans disproportionately having a higher incidence rate as well as a higher mortality rate. Thank you for bringing up that topic.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, and all of the panelists. I'm so grateful to have brought you together today. It was an amazing conversation. I'd like to just pass it over to Kevin, to close this up. But thank you so much, sincerely, for this amazing conversation.
Thank you so much, DB. And I just want to echo my, this has been so educational, and just want to thank everyone that participated today. Before you leave, because I know as things wind down, some folks might start to sort of leave Zoom. A couple of quick things we want to tell you is, first of all, we have another event coming up on March 30th. So if you're actually part of this Zoom today, you'll get notifications to let you know about the time and the specifics around that. And in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and put a link. Just click on that, and that'll help take you to some of the prior content we have. So if you've missed any of their earlier sessions, once you log in, you're able to actually get access to all of that. So even if you want to relive and take a second look at a session that you attended last year. And then also, I just want to highlight that as you end the session, a screen will pop up with a questionnaire. This is really important, and I just wanted to kind of highlight that for you. And we're going to be asking a couple of key things, how you heard about this session. How did you, what did you get from this? And then really, as I touched on at the beginning of our session, do you feel that sense of empowerment? Do you feel that sense of call to action? A lot of these type of seminars and discussions and panel discussions can really be eye-opening, but they really stop there unless we do something about it. And so I just want to reinforce and end on that point that the work that we have to do is important, and it is manageable if we all see what role we can play in making a difference in health equity. I want to thank you again for being here today, for all of our speakers. Thank you, Dr. Edith. That I tell you, it was nice to get a chance to meet you during the prep sessions and hearing you today and some of the things that we talked about as a group. I just want you to know how much I appreciate all the contribution of all of you to this work of health equity. And we look forward to talking more as we go throughout 2022. There's a lot of discussions and additional things we can do to help motivate us to create meaningful change in this space. And I'm going to stop for just a quick second before we close. Is there any questions or thoughts that any of the panelists that would, that didn't get a chance, or maybe anything you'd like to share before we segue and close out? Anything?
So Kevin, on behalf of our panelists and myself, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to work with you in presenting this webinar. And I thank our participants for hanging in there with us to the end. So thank you so much on behalf of all of the panelists today. They were just tremendous in their work, tremendous in their presentations, and we look forward to further events in the future. Thank you.
That's a wonderful one. I think I'm gonna close on that. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening or your day, and we'll see you soon.